Thank you all so much for having me here. I'm delighted to be back in Chicago. I love it that it's actually still part of the United States. And I say that because I've been traveling a lot this past year, talking about the book and the themes, and really talking about, there are two questions that I asked in the book, and there's two questions that I'm going to be talking about tonight and when I give talks, and that is why. First of all, why? Why are things the way they are? Why do so many of us feel overwhelmed and breathless? And second of all, what can you do about it? Is there any place that it's better? So I've been traveling to Canada quite a bit, which is really interesting that Canadians are feeling overwhelmed. And one day I had been working on a story for the Washington Post, and I packed my bag and I flew to the airport, and I was cutting it really close and I knew it, and I ran up to the desk and I handed over my driver's license, and the woman looked at me and she just said, where's your passport? I said, well, driver's license doesn't work anymore. She goes, honey, Canada's a different country. So delighted to be here in Chicago with just a driver's license. So that said, I am no longer overwhelmed like I was in chapter 1, but this past year has been very challenging, I will say. So let me see if I can get started here. All right, so I want to start with the end in mind. I mean, how many of us know what it feels like to be overwhelmed? I don't want to really talk a lot about what. You know, show of hands, anybody feel a little stressed out in the last week? How about in the last 24 hours, even though it was Mother's Day and a weekend? Yeah. So we all know what that feels like, and it doesn't feel really great. Most people will say, the scientists will say that stress and overwhelm comes from two things: a lack of control and an inability to predict. So think about how many times in your life you have both of those situations kind of swirling around. So what's the opposite of that? Where is it that we really want to go? And that's the good life. I want you to take just a moment and close your eyes, if you will. Hopefully you won't fall asleep after a nice long meal. And think about the last time you really felt joy, where you were in a moment of leisure, where it felt timeless, where you were in a state of what psychologists call flow, peak human experience, when time didn't matter. When was the last time you played? Anybody, you can open your eyes. Anybody want to share a moment? Well, I tell you, for most people, particularly in the United States, not in Europe, but in the United States, when I ask that question, most people, they can't really tell you when the last time was that they played. They might be able to tell you when they went on vacation, but a lot of times people will say, vacation sometimes is just a whole lot more work. You kind of bring yourself along with you. The Harvard psychologist Erik Erikson said the richest and fullest lives, the good life, make time for the three great arenas of life: work, love, and play. Now that's meaningful work, work that makes you feel that you have a purpose, that you are here for a reason. That's love, where you have close connection with members of your family, with your community, that you know your neighbors. Human connection, we're discovering, is the basis, the source of all human happiness. And you have time to play. You have time for leisure. The Greek philosopher said that we work to have leisure upon which happiness is based. Well, I would argue that in the United States, we have a whole lot of work. We work among the longest hours of any advanced economy, and that impinges on the time that we have to love. And I would argue that we really don't play. We are the only advanced economy that has no national vacation policy. Those of us who do get vacation, and 1 in 4 workers do not. Those of us that do get vacation get about 10 to 14 days on average, and we leave among the most unused days on the table. And when we do take vacation, many of us take work along with us. So that's not a good idea. When I first started working on this book, I didn't really think one way or another. I was very work focused. Most of us in the United States are. Work is where I got my identity. Work is what I spend most of my time on. And I thought that leisure was sort of silly and stupid and unproductive. And in the course of reporting this book, I changed my mind. And what I hope to do tonight is to change yours. So I'm going to start with Mark Twain. If you had gone up to his house or his farm where he was staying with his family one summer in the late 19th century, this is what you would have seen at least once or twice a week. Mark Twain laying outside in the shade of a tree on his back, staring up at the clouds. Okay, so look at him through our lens of the busy, crazy, fast-paced 21st century lives. And what do you see? Loser, slacker, get to work, what's wrong with you? Why are you wasting your time? At the end of that summer, Mark Twain finished The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, one of his great masterpieces. There was an Amnesty International researcher who was stuck on a train between Manchester and London for 4 hours. And what did she do? She looked out the window. She spaced out. She was idle. She doodled. And at the end of that 4 hours, the author J.K. Rowling has said the entire plot of the Harry Potter series fell into her brain. Because what we're discovering is that when we are idle, our brains are actually most active. What lights up is something called the default mode network, and it connects different parts of the brain that don't typically connect, like airport hubs. So you can have a random memory, a stray thought, snippet of a song or a dream, all come together in a completely fresh way for that aha moment, the moment of inspiration. Your brain is actually wired for that aha moment to come in a moment of rest. And that we're discovering, courtesy of neuroscience, that the most effective way to work is not all out all the time, like we do, most of us in the United States, but an oscillation between concentrated work and time off and away. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a little bit. But first, I'm going to talk about how I got started on this and how I started in what I like to call time confetti. So, as Lonnie mentioned, I'm a reporter at the Washington Post, and a couple years ago, we were looking at our readership numbers and seeing a gap between male and female readers that we hadn't seen before. And so the powers that be put together a women readers committee, and we were supposed to try to find out why women weren't reading the newspaper. And so I went into the Women Readers Committee, where I was one of the members, and sitting around the table are a bunch of women, and we did a collective eye roll. Well, duh, women aren't reading the newspaper because women are really busy. Because this is what mornings look like in my house. There's my husband, little half glasses on, reading the newspaper on the counter, like he's in a dome of silence, not perturbed by anything going on around him. And this is me, more like the Tasmanian devil. I am emptying the dishwasher and I'm loading the dishwasher and I'm finding the homework in the garbage can. And what do you mean, where's this Girl Scout cookie form that I was supposed to sign 2 weeks ago? And come back here, it's picture day, and oh my God, you've got to stain on that shirt and everybody's going to think I'm a terrible mother. Come back here. So mornings were kind of crazy. So then I'd rush into work and some editor would come up and say, well, did you see that story on page A3? Oh, yes. Oh my God, what did it say? And this meeting became more of a confessional, if you will, about how much difficulty we ourselves had reading the newspaper, and we worked for the newspaper. And so we wanted to find the data that would back up this claim that women are really busy. So not knowing anything, I went to Google, busy mother, women, time, just Googled all that, and up pops this guy named John Robinson. And I had no idea who he was. Turns out they call him Father Time. He is one of the preeminent time use researchers in the world, really. So I called him up and I said, we're doing this report about how women are having a hard time reading the newspaper. We figure they're too busy. And he said, wrong. Women aren't busy. Women have 30 hours of leisure a week. No, they don't have as much as men. Men have nearly 40 hours of leisure. Well, I can't remember if I dropped the phone or if I fell out of the chair. I kind of thought back in my mind over the past week, 30 hours of leisure. Well, let's see. There's Friday night, pizza movie night. We watch Sound of Music again. I don't know if that counts. There's the Saturday that I go to yoga class, but it's at 8:30, and I'm always 10 minutes late because I try to get going before the kids get up because I feel guilty that I've been gone at work all week, and then they get up, and then I'm late, and then I go to this yoga class, and I'm stressed out for an hour. I suppose that's leisure time. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, I don't have 30 hours of leisure. And he said, yes, you do. Come and do a time study, and I will show you where your leisure is. So about a year and a half later, I actually started tracking my time. Part of it, honestly, I was too busy to track my time. I would start on a Monday, and then I'd forget to track my time, and by Tuesday, I would have completely forgotten what I'd done on Monday. I knew I was really busy, but I could not tell you what exactly I did. And so then he sent me a template to keep. And I called him up at one point because you had to write what you were doing and describe it in one of these little categories. And I said, my time doesn't fit in these nice little categories. So here I am, I'm at work, so that's work. And I'm on the phone with you, so that's work. And I'm eating my lunch at my desk, so that's personal care. And I'm on the hold with the pharmacy because my son's EpiPen prescription needs to be refilled, so that's what, childcare? And I'm surfing the web because my brother-in-law died in China, and I'm trying to figure out how to get his ashes back. I mean, what kind of time is this? And he said, just keep a diary and I'll figure it out. So I began carrying around these little black books where I would write not only what I was doing, but how I felt about it. So I'll just read you a little entry at September 8th at 4 a.m. Wake with a start, familiar panic. What am I doing with my life? Am I living fully? Will I regret? Of course. If I died now, money and debt worries. Realize it's raining outside. Throw on some clothes and run outside to take the cushions in. So my life, as I was gathering as I was writing down the time, it felt scattered and fragmented, and that's how I came up with the term time confetti, because that's what my time felt like. Little bits and scraps of everything all at once, all the time, and always thinking and worrying and planning, and did I have enough for dinner, and what about the carpool, and what about this? And I found this wonderful term as I began researching the book called Contaminated Time, where you've got so much on your mind, you are literally polluted, and you are everywhere and nowhere except right there in the present moment. You're lost in your thoughts. And so particularly for women, because women are still doing twice the housework and childcare, in addition to a lot of paid work, there is just this constant tape loop that runs through your mind so that you can be in a moment that might look like leisure on the outside, but on the inside is anything but. So that's a lot of how I was feeling. So I finally I did type up a week, and I brought it up to John Robinson, and I scooted it across the table at Father Time, And if you know me, growing up, most friends sort of laughed until they fell out of their chairs when I said I was writing a book about time, because first of all, I have to say I'm delighted that I'm here on time. Time is always something that I've struggled with. I think I'm like a 2-year-old. Transitions are very difficult for me. I was always the kid that was running out the door with the toothbrush in hand to get to school on time. So time has been difficult for me, and I brought it up to Father Time feeling like it was Judgment Day, my little time diaries. And one of the reasons I love the cover of my book so much is he took out a yellow highlighter and he started highlighting everything that he called leisure in my diary. And the first one was listening to the radio for 20 minutes, laying in bed, being so exhausted I couldn't get out of bed. Screech, leisure time. I'm like, oh, come on. Leisure, really? I said I was tired. He's like, nope, listening to the radio is leisure time. Every time I got exercise, screech. I'm like, but I hate exercise. It's like, nope, exercise is leisure time. And then I was driving my daughter to a ballet class, and my beloved old station wagon broke down yet again, and I sailed off to the side of the road, and we waited for a tow truck for 2 hours. Screech. And I said, oh, come on, you got to be kidding me. And he said, oh, that's right, you were with your daughter, so that's childcare time. Wait a minute, so if I had been by myself in the car, that would have been leisure? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, that didn't feel very leisurely. And he shrugged and he said, I just measure time. I'm not a chronotherapist. So the implication was that if I wasn't enjoying my leisure time, there was something really wrong with me. He ended up finding 27 hours of what he called leisure, and I called bits and scraps of garbagey time confetti. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Because what is leisure? That's certainly not leisure to me. When the Greeks said leisure is the place where you refresh your soul and are most fully human, well, that ain't sitting in a car waiting for a tow truck. So the book became a journey to really understand, what is leisure and why do we not have it? The first thing that I wanted to do was understand, well, why is it important? Because at first I didn't think it was important. And so the first thing that you do is you look at our stress levels in the United States, where we work among the longest hours and where we do not take vacation. Our stress levels are actually so high that the World Health Organization has called us the most anxious country on earth. In our lifetimes, fully 1/3 of us will be so anxious as to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And probably very important for this audience today, the average student today feels as much anxiety as the average mental patient did in the 1950s. So we're a very rich country, we are a very anxious country, and the World Happiness Report just came out that the United Nations puts out every few years, and we are actually number 15 in our happiness. And one of the reasons why is because we are so focused on money, and money does not make you happy. I'm going to compare our anxiety level with Nigeria. Not very anxious. Now, the important thing about stress is that a little stress is actually good for you. It's actually good for us. It's the way we humans evolved. Out in the savannah, we needed to very quickly figure out, this is a tiger, I've got to run, this is a lovely piece of fruit I can eat. And if that was a tiger, then you very quickly had to run as fast as you could. You needed all of your organs, all of the blood and oxygen to drain from your brain and your organs out to your muscles so you could run as fast as you could back to the cave and back to safety. And then once there, your heart rate came down, your breathing's regulated. It's what scientists call allostasis, that we have always survived with stress and release, stress and release. You need a little stress before a race, before a test, before a big presentation, that it keeps you on your toes. It's good for you. But too much stress, when your body is constantly being bathed in cortisol and adrenaline and the stress hormones, coupled with the perception that you are very stressed out and that stress is bad for you, that is actually a recipe for disaster. That's been associated with high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, even cancer. There have been studies that have shown that cortisol, those stress hormones, act like a contagion. And when you come home at the end of the day and you're stressed out from work, it acts like a virus and it can pass through everyone else in the house, including your children. And that cortisol can actually get and change their DNA. So that's one of the reasons why you should care. The other reason, I spent time at the Yale Stress Center, where they are just doing some new fMRI brain scan studies to try to understand, well, what is stress doing to our brains? We know what it does to our bodies. What about our brains? And they've taken brain scans and taken different histories of people. And what they've discovered is that if you had two conditions, if you had been through a number of stressful events and you had the perception that you were really stressed out, your prefrontal cortex, those nice little yellow blobs there, this is one of the most recently evolved portions of our brain, where we think and learn, remember, and make decisions. That portion of your brain was fully 20% smaller in volume than the people who did not have the same perception that they were stressed out. So, yes, we should care. We should care that so many people are feeling overwhelmed because it's shrinking our brains. But not to worry, because Harvard is doing some other really interesting work. We know that monks who spend months on end meditating in caves, that their brain structures are huge and different and amazing. And I don't know about you, but I don't have 5 months to go meditate in a cave. Perhaps my kids would actually like that now that they're teenagers. So Harvard, the neuroscientists there wanted to understand, well, what could average people do in their daily lives to take advantage of some of the benefits of mindfulness? So they took 2 groups of people, and one they had go through their regular stressful lives, and another group they put through an 8-week-long mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And they took brain images at the beginning of the 8 weeks and again at the end. And what they discovered is that the people who'd gone through their stressful lives, there was no change. But for the people who'd been through that 8-week-long mindfulness-based stress reduction program, their brains actually expanded in 4 distinct regions that have to do with self-consciousness and self-identity, and also in the hippocampus, that little green seahorse-shaped thing there, which controls emotion, memory, and also these are parts of the brain that control the amygdala, which is the seat of panic, fear, negative emotion, and anxiety. And what I found most profoundly hopeful, because we're all so busy, and when I tell that story, people come to me, it's like, oh man, one more thing to put on my to-do list. Really? Mindfulness? But what was most profoundly hopeful is that their brains expanded in as little as 27 minutes a day of doing yoga or meditating or simply being present in the present moment, because that's all mindfulness is. Just being where you are, out of your thoughts and in the moment. Now, one of the first things that I discovered as I continued to report about time is that time is power. The decisions that you make for what you do with your time at 10 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, every day, it's the very dailiness of life and those decisions. That's what adds up to what your life is in the end. It's those small decisions that matter. And one of the things that's important, particularly for women to understand, is that women's time has always been fragmented, always been interrupted. There's never really been an opportunity to sink into flow. Because what do you need for flow? Long stretches of unbroken, concentrated time. So women have never had access to that. There's never been a history or culture of leisure or flow for women. I went to a time use study, and I was asking one of the researchers there, I went to a conference, I was asking one of the researchers about women and flow, and she looked at me, like I was crazy, and she goes, why do you think women became nuns? That throughout history, that was sort of the only time it was acceptable for you to have flow, have something else to do. But now the world is changing. It's time for women to have that opportunity for flow. And as technology and as work chops up time for everybody, it's something we all need to be aware of and mindful. Because we tend to think that if we multitask, if we do a whole lot of stuff, it's actually better. We're going to get a whole lot more done. We're going to be so much more efficient. And that's actually not true. How many of you think that women are better at multitasking than men? Show of hands. You know, that's a real common misperception out there. We're not. Right now, brain science is really new. We don't really understand the differences in gender. And what we do know is that there's more variation in your brain within gender than there is across gender. So that's really one of the gigantic myths out there, that women are just better at multitasking. We all do it. But the best research shows that we really, as human beings, we cannot pay attention to 2 things that require attention and thought at the same time and get any possibility of a good result. You'll kind of do a mediocre job at both. Yes, of course, you may empty the dishwasher and be on hold with the cable repair guy, because that's very low attention, low value attention. But you really cannot listen to a friend and send an email at the same time. Do one thing at a time, because the multitasking is part of what leaves us feeling breathless. And I will tell you that there was a study done in the UK that if you multitask, your IQ drops 10 points, and it makes you as stupid as being stoned. Although I would really like to know how they tested that. Maybe they went to Colorado. The other thing that I discovered as I was doing the reporting and reflecting on my time, that I always felt busy. I always felt like that was a virtuous thing. I called it virtuous busyness, and I had this long to-do list. I worked with a time management guru at one point. She was trying to help me get a handle on time, and she said, well, what are you going to do by next week? And I gave her this huge long list from here to eternity of everything that I ever needed to do in my life. And she's like, oh, okay. And the next week, the first call was, so how long did it take before you figured out you weren't going to get it all done? I'm like, well, I kind of knew all along. She goes, how'd you feel? I said, I felt really crummy. So we set ourselves up for failure from the start by putting these huge long to-do lists out there and thinking we can't do anything else, we can't have fun, we can't play until we get to the end of that long to-do list. I started calling it the tyranny of the to-do list. And I lived that way. I would say, if I finished all this stuff on my to-do list, then I could play, then I could read a book, then I could sit and watch my kids blow bubbles. But boy, I had all sorts of stuff to do before I got there. I called it living the if-then mentality. And the only problem was I never got to then, because I was always in if, because there was always more stuff to do. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest revelations, is there will always be more stuff to do. Overwhelm does not go away. You cannot manage time. What you can manage are your priorities and your expectations. And the only way to figure out what those are is to stop. Just stop for a moment, take a breath, take a walk, become clearer and clearer about what's important to you. And it may not be what's important to everyone else. And that's scary because we're human and we like to conform to the group. And right now the group is very, very busy and overworked and overparenting and crazy. So take that time, figure out what's important to you, and then take your to-do list and flip it. And put the things that are important, that are priorities, that give you joy, put them at the top. So this is my very favorite to-do list. This is Johnny Cash's to-do list. And if you look, number 1 on his to-do list is not smoke. Number 2, kiss June. Number 3, not kiss anyone else. Words to live by. So I want to talk a little bit about play, because again, we don't play. And this was a surprising thing to me, that there was a Dutch philosopher who said that humans are not only built to play, and they shouldn't be called Homo sapiens, the thinking human, but Homo ludens, the playing human. And now modern science is showing us that that is indeed true, that there are many species that play as juveniles, but humans are the only species that continue to play as adults. Now, so what does that mean? Okay, yes, we like to dress up for Halloween, and that's play, sort of make-believe. It's sports, telling stories, telling jokes, get together with friends, keeping an open mind, curiosity, imagination. What play does is it opens up the possible. With your imagination, you can take what does not exist and create a whole world, and then in your work time, make it real. It's what distinguishes us as humans, our ability to imagine, to have a playful attitude, to be curious. What play does, it sculpts our brains, it makes them adaptable, flexible, and creative, so that in turn, we will have creative, adaptable, and flexible societies and civilizations. One of the most compelling studies that I read as I was reading about the research of play, there were researchers who took rats, and they wanted to understand, well, why is play important? What does it do? And they weren't really quite sure. So they took rats. Rats play as juveniles. They do not play as adults. And they separated them, and they took a group of rats and put them with adults, so they never learned how to play. And then they took a group of rats that had played as juveniles and rats that did not ever learn how to play and put them in a very stressful situation where they could smell a predator. So what did they all do? They immediately all ran for cover, which is the right thing to do. Fight or flight. They ran for cover. They found safety. But after a while, it was only the rats who played who came out and began exploring to see if it was safe. The rats who had never played, many of them never came out. Some of them died. So play helps us imagine the future, imagine what can be possible, to explore, to discover, to set the future. But we don't. We don't really value it. I was looking at why I felt so busy and why I felt like that was such a virtue. And I called a leisure researcher. And I tell you right now, there are not many leisure researchers in the United States. I talked to one in North Carolina who said that her mother was ashamed of her and hated to tell people that her daughter was a leisure researcher. And her own university changed the name of the department from the Leisure Studies Department to the Department of Parks, Tourism, and Recreation, because that sounded so much more productive. Some of the best leisure researchers are actually in Canada. And one of the interesting things that they'll say is that leisure is really in the eye of the beholder. Leisure is what you decide it is. It's not what some time use researcher is going to highlight in yellow on your time diary. And it requires that you have a sense of choice over the activity and control over the time. And it refreshes your soul. So I called a leisure researcher here in the United States, a guy named Ben Honeycutt, and I just said, I just feel too busy to have leisure. And he said, one of the 7 deadly sins. I was like, oh, come on, really? I'm feeling inadequate at work, I'm feeling busy, I'm feeling like I'm not a very good mother, and now I'm sinning? Come on. And he said, in the Middle Ages, sloth was one of the 7 deadly sins. And in sloth, as we all know, is if you have teenagers, that's sort of what they look like on a Saturday afternoon, right? Hanging out on the couch, probably all sorts of like crackers and crumbs all over the place with the TV on, not doing a whole lot. So that kind of sense of laziness and not getting off the couch is sloth. But the flip side of it, he said, was acedia. And I said, well, what's acedia? He said, that's when you're running as fast as you can, and man, you don't know where you're going, but you're making great time. I was like, okay, busted. Yeah, that's what it feels like. So I wanted to understand, where did that come from, and why did I feel so busy, and why did I feel like that was a good thing? And so I found a researcher in LA, and I was going to spend time with him. He studies frenetic families. I thought that would be perfect, except he called me up and he said he was too busy for me to come spend time with him. So then with my deadline coming, I really had to find something else. And so I went to an archive where there's all this great research, and I just put in busyness. And one researcher popped up from Fargo, North Dakota. And I called her up. I'm like, really? Fargo? I mean, I thought you guys would be sitting on the front porch, it wasn't sort of a type A crazy city. I live in Washington, D.C. It's not like New York or L.A. or Chicago where everybody's rushing around. And she said, oh, honey, you want to meet some overwhelmed North Dakotans? I can arrange that. So I went to Fargo, North Dakota, and there we were. And I sat in on a focus group, and around the table were some incredibly overwhelmed, stressed out people. There was a young woman who felt so busy that she decided not to have children. There was a woman who'd said that the last time she had leisure, she was like, probably when I was in my doctor's office waiting for my mammogram, which I don't think is what the Greeks had in mind. And then a woman came bursting in and said she'd been, to hundreds of different places that morning, and she had all sorts of stuff to do, and she was really triple booked at a meeting, and then she got stuck in traffic. So I look out the window, and I see one traffic light, and I see 3 cars, and I see cornfields. And at that point, I looked at the researcher. Her name is Ann Burnett, and she came up with her theory that busyness has become a badge of honor by reading Christmas letters over the years. She gathers holiday letters, and we spent an afternoon reading through them, and let me tell you, I had to take a nap after I read some of these. We are getting busier and busier, and she studies language, and she circles all of the language that we use in our Christmas letters, our holiday letters. Ever faster the planets spin, I carpool, I drive 100 miles a day, I'm doing all this stuff. I feel like the Halloween witch smushed against the front door at the end of the day. And her contention is we have made busyness the way we show our status, and that sometimes we will create it when it doesn't exist. Now, for all of us here, this impetus to overwork, to overdo, we put all of this stress on our kids to be these ideal students. We overschedule them. We're so worried about what the future holds. We're so uncertain because the keys to success aren't very clear. The economy is changing. We're not sure, and we want to make sure that they get everything, every possible advantage in the future. But what we're not doing them any favors. Another reason we overschedule our kids is this same John Robinson came up with the study back in the 80s when mothers first started going into the workplace. And everybody was afraid that mothers would abandon their kids if they went off to work. And so he did a study, and that's what he found. Working mothers hardly ever saw their kids. And the press went crazy, and headlines were all over the place. Mean, horrible working mothers, they abandon their children. Aren't they horrible, selfish people? And so what creeped in was this horrendous sense of guilt for most working mothers, and I can attest to that, just horrendously guilty all the time. The problem was, he was wrong. He had made a miscalculation. But by the time he'd corrected his math, it was too late. Nobody wanted to listen to him because the incorrect calculation just reinforced what everybody already thought and what everybody was already afraid of. So now what's happened is that we're spending more and more time with our kids than ever before. Something that I like to call the cult of intensive motherhood. This is my son's 8-year-old birthday party. I staged D-Day. Okay, that's crazy. Like I say, this is a talk I call Confessions of a Recovering Helicopter Parent. But I was so filled with guilt all the time that I was a working parent, and that I was certain that I didn't spend enough time with my kids. I was certain that I didn't give them everything that they needed. So I went overboard when I could. So we had vinegar and baking soda bombs. We had fake blood. A friend of mine speaks German, and she wrote German war plans that we hid in the bushes for a scavenger hunt. I mean, what happened to pin the tail on the donkey? But the crazy thing is that this wasn't all that much out of line, it wasn't all that different from what my other friends were doing, the pirate parties and the, cowboy parties and the ponies. Some people call it competitive parenting. No, I think a lot of it is, for me anyway, was to try to show, look, I'm not a bad mom. Look at how much I love my kids. But the crazy thing is, mothers today, even when they work, are spending more time with their kids than stay-at-home moms did in the 60s and 70s. You say, how can that possibly be true? That was one of the things that I almost didn't believe when I first started reading about it. And when I look at the time diaries, it's pretty clear what happened. Mothers have given up time for sleep, time for personal care, time for friends, time with spouse. And they spend almost all of their free time, their leisure time, with their children. And I'll tell you, men are starting to do the same thing. Young men in particular who want to be involved, who want to have that hands-on experience with their kids, they're starting to do the same thing, giving up time for sleep, time for personal care, and spending all of their leisure time with their kids. Which is why you get studies that show that men today are feeling more stress from work-life conflict than women are. I sort of argue that women have been doing it for longer. And while this is a terrible thing, I hate to say that this is a horrible thing that men are feeling stressed too. I almost say this is a good thing, because now that we're all feeling this tug, the conflicts that we have between trying to be this ideal worker at work, this ideal parent, it's time for some change. And that stress is from both sides, men and women, is what's going to help us make that change. Because it's not good for kids. It's not good for us, it's not good for kids. This is a map of a child's shrinking habitat. It was done in the UK. And the largest section, that's how much a couple generations ago we let our kids roam. And that little teeny tiny black circle right there, that's how far we let kids roam on their own today. If you heard the free-range parenting debate, the parents in Silver Spring, Maryland, who let their kids walk home a mile from the park and now are under investigation from Child Protective Services. When did having a childhood become free-range parenting? So all of that time we spend with our kids and the hyped-up worry that we spend, it's not good for us and it's not good for them, because what we're discovering is that kids need just what we need. Unstructured time for play. They need to figure out who they are, what they like, how to fail, how to pick themselves up from that and move on without us rescuing them. That those are the seeds of independence that will help them develop. We tend to think that if we parent for achievement, that that's what's going to make our kids happy. We say that that's all we want for our kids. We want them to be happy. But there was a meta-analysis done of more than 200 studies on achievement and happiness. And you can parent for achievement, and you may or may not get happiness. But if you parent for happiness first, and that doesn't mean sloth or pleasure or letting them laze around on the couch and play video games all the day. But if you parent for happiness, true, authentic happiness, where you've figured out who you are and you know how to follow a passion, it's okay if you fail because you feel good about yourself. If you parent for true, authentic happiness, achievement comes. So this is part of an authentic success movement, which I think is a huge antidote to the race to nowhere that so many of us have been on, the treadmill of trying to push our kids and overschedule them and overdo, trying to prevent any failure in the future. This is Wilma Bowers in McLean, Virginia. And if any of you know McLean, Virginia, this is where the type A of all the type A type people live in the Washington, D.C. area. These are the people who work in the administration, who have all the advanced degrees from Harvard and Stanford and Yale. And the parents there were doing a survey, a health survey of tobacco use and alcohol use. And a couple years ago, they started noticing that their children's stress levels were off the charts. And they started trying to figure out why. And the kids were so stressed that they weren't sleeping at night. Some of them were even considering suicide. They were depressed. What we're discovering is that kids today, with all of the, trying to, be in their business and make sure that they don't fail and help them with their homework, and we're not doing them favors because they get to college and they don't know who they are and they don't know what they like. They don't know how to make their own decisions. Fully a quarter of all freshmen are on some kind of antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication because we haven't given them the tools to learn how to be who they really are. Because we need to parent not for achievement, but for grit, for having a growth mindset, that you have the sense that you can try and fail and it's okay, you can try again. To have gratitude. When you look at the World Happiness Report, generosity, compassion, gratitude, giving to others, that's what makes you happy. And when you get to college, we tend to think, there's only just a handful of great schools we want our kids to go to. There are 3,000 colleges out there, and there is a seat for your child, the right place. Because there are studies, wonderful studies, that we need to pay attention to more than the U.S. News and World Report rankings of number 1 and 2. And these studies show that it's not where you go to college that matters. It's what you bring to college and what you do while you're there. Your energy, your persistence, your imagination, that's what matters. That's what's going to spell success and happiness. That there's this wonderful thing called the sweet spot, where, too little is not enough, too much is too much, more is not better, but just right, the sweet spot. We all know that activities are good for kids because if you try something new when you're a child, you're much more likely to try something new when you're an adult. And that novelty is what continually shapes and rewires our brains and helps us continue to grow and evolve. So you want your kids to have some activities, but too many. That's when you start hitting the other side of the sweet spot. So I want to talk about what keeps us really all running and spinning in place, and it really starts at work. How many of you saw this Cadillac commercial about, we're American, we work so hard, and the stupid French, they get 30 days off, and, we only get 2 weeks, and aren't we awesome? Well, I hated that commercial. Because what that does is it reinforces this notion that the best worker, the ideal worker, comes in early, stays late, eats lunch at their desk, works all hours, sleeps at their desk sometimes. We tend to think that that is the best worker. There's social science research that shows that's true, that there was a survey done of executives and CEOs around the globe. And when they were asked, who is the ideal worker? Who's the best worker? More than 3/4 said someone with no caregiving responsibilities. Well, who is that? That's certainly not women, or mothers, I should say. And it's certainly not a whole lot of men who would like to be more involved fathers. It's describing somebody who doesn't exist anymore. a man from the 1950s. And yet that mythology, that is the best worker, is still so very powerful. And I think one of the aha moments for me, one of many in reporting the book, is to discover that, I certainly bought into that notion that working all the time is what made you better. It's actually not true. Working all the time gets you burned out. When you look at international measures of productivity, hourly productivity, yes, we work long hours, but are those good hours? Look at who's the most productive by hour in the world. Norway. And they work a 37.5-hour work week, which many of us would consider part-time. And look who's about as productive per hour as we are. France, with their 30 days of paid vacation and strolling off to the cafe after work. They're about as productive per hour as we are. And look at who is not very productive per hour. The two countries that work among the longest hours. Japan, where there is actually a word for death from overwork called karoshi. And there's also this wonderful term called furoshiki. They call it cloaked overtime. And what that means is that you can't leave the office until the boss does, even if you have nothing to do. How many of you have worked in a FaceTime environment like that? So they're not very productive per hour, nor is South Korea. That's the other country that works longer hours than we do. And in South Korea, the Wall Street Journal reported not long ago that they've actually created meditation prisons where somebody can go and check themselves in just to try to get away from it all. Blue uniforms, a number. So in trying to figure out, well, who's doing it better? Is there anything out there to be hopeful about? I did find what I call bright spots. This is Menlo Innovations. It's a software company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I would call this the new ideal worker. I walked in and they work in pair partners, and there's a guy with a burp cloth on his shoulder writing this complicated computer code, rocking his 4-month-old infant daughter. And then when he was done, he handed his daughter off to his pair partner, who's this grizzled old guy with short hair. Guy sits down, takes a baby bottle, plops the bottle in, and they keep working. And so I went to the owner. I was like, babies at work? What's going on? And that was the 8th Menlo baby. And he said, oh, babies make people nicer. One of the things that I found as I was looking for different work environments, what I discovered is that there is no one size fits all, that it depends very much on your industry, on your business, on your clients, on the personality of your leadership. But there are lots of different really interesting things that people are doing out there. And the one thing they're all doing is trying to find a way to give everyone time for meaningful work, love, and play. At Menlo, they want everyone there. It's not a telework kind of culture because they like that sense of collaboration and brainstorming. But I will tell you right now, because I saw it at 6 o'clock, everybody is gone. You are not to answer work emails. You are not to answer work cell phone calls or take any calls. The owner, Rich Sheridan, wants everyone to go home and have a life because you will be healthier and happier. He wants you well rested. But also if you play with your kids, if you do something fun, if you take a class, if you go play in the hockey league, if you go canoeing, that default mode network is going to light up. That aha moment is going to happen. And you will come into work the next day, and you will not only be refreshed and happy, but you may know how to solve an old problem in a new way. You may have had that moment of insight, and he wants you there in your full, authentic self, because you'll be a better worker if you have a full life. There was a woman there who was a refugee from corporate America, where she worked routinely 70 and 80-hour weeks. And she said they came over to her after her second week and said, if you cannot figure out how to do your job in 40 hours, we will fire you. She said, I had to go home and for the first time learn how to have a life again. And the last couple of things I want to leave you with, we all have heard about the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. How many of you have heard that? You need 10,000 hours, right? It's a very popular thing we know about. And so what did I heard about that, and I thought, man, 10,000 hours, I'm just going to power through. I'm going to go through 10,000 hours. I'm going to get it all done. It's going to be excellent. But what we didn't realize is that was based on a study done by a Florida psychologist named Anders Ericsson. And he wanted to know, what did it take to be excellent at anything? And so he went to the Berlin's Conservatory of Music, and he mapped the days, how different musicians spent their days. Okay, now no offense to the teachers here, but this is how the teachers spent their days. There was not a whole lot of variation in them. This is how they got their 10,000 hours in. This is how the virtuosos got their 10,000 hours in, the green line there. What he found is that they worked intensely first thing in the morning. They had already decided they were going to work first thing in the morning, so they didn't have decision fatigue. They didn't have that energy expending on like, will I, won't I? That was a set time for them. They worked intensely, but for no more than 90 minutes, and then they took a break. And they worked in pulses. Their days sort of looked like mountain peaks. They napped more. They rested more than the people on the teacher course. They had a little less leisure time, but they were very intentional about what they did with their time. They could tell you exactly what they did and why and how they felt about it. Whereas the teachers and the others, they couldn't really remember. They were tired. They just kind of schlepped in front of the TV and they turned it on. And I will tell you right now that what happens to your brain when you're watching TV, it looks the same as if you were staring at a wallpaper. It really does not, I know we all do it and it's fun, and I'm not here to say don't watch TV, but understand it's a little different than that kind of leisure that is very engaging and refreshing to your soul. So sure, watch TV. Hey, Game of Thrones, I'm all over it. But recognize that you need space for other kinds of play too. Because what we're finding is that just as we have 90-minute sleep cycles at night, we have 90-minute attentiveness cycles during the day. And that's one of the most powerful things that you can use, to have that sense of, use that 90 minutes to have a concentrated, uninterrupted time, to get into flow, to do what is most important, to do it first thing in the morning, and then take a break, take a walk. Find some time at that point to bound yourself and check your email and social media. Don't leave it going all day, because there's great research that shows that when you bound it and you check your email no more than 3 to 5 times, you're actually happier. So use your brain's own system of pulse and release and the 90-minute attentiveness cycles. Now, the other huge cultural ideal out there, we've got the ideal worker. We've also got the ideal mother. And I talked a little bit before about how time with kids is on the rise. I will also say that the standards for what we consider a good mother have never been higher, which is crazy, because we've never had more mothers who work outside of the home for pay, nor more mothers who work full time. So we've kind of got these crazy-making ideals out there that we get so busy we don't even recognize that we're kind of swimming in this water. We're dancing to this tune we don't even hear, and it's not our tune. And so that's why it's a real call in my book to take a moment and just stop and figure out what it is you're doing and what's important. Do I really want to be baking these cupcakes at 2 a.m. for the Valentine's Day party tomorrow? Who am I doing this for? Am I really doing it for my kids? Believe me, I wish I had asked myself that, because I did it plenty of times, and then I was so tired that the next day I was an absolute witch to the very children that I was supposedly doing this for out of a moment of love. So ask yourself what you're doing. And this is a real call as well to re-examine our gender roles. I say what the book does is it calls for redefining work, reimagining the way we form our families and our gender roles, and recapturing the value of leisure. And I'll tell you a story. Probably one of the most difficult days of my life. I was sort of dividing the furniture up in my head for the divorce that I was sure was coming. It's Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and it's 2 p.m, and the kitchen looks like a bomb has gone off, because I not only have the ideal worker in my head, and I'm working all the time, and I have the ideal mother in my head, and I'm crazy, and I'm signing my kids up for too many activities and schlepping them around. I also have Martha Stewart living in there. So I've invited 18 people to come over for Thanksgiving. I'm cooking all sorts of recipes that I have never tried before, and I've got my glasses on, and I'm trying to follow the recipes. The table's not set, and my husband comes over to the fridge, and I think he's going to put the turkey in. And he opens it, and he takes out a 6-pack of beer. And he says, I'm going to go to Peter's house and help him with his turkey. And I say, Peter is smoking his turkey. So you're going to go to Peter's house and sit on the patio in the sun, drinking beer and watching Peter's turkey? And he kind of shrugged, and he walked out the door. Now I had a knife in my hand. You know, if I had just had that circus training. At that moment, I was livid, but I was also profoundly sad, because when we first got married, we had made this promise that we would be equal partners in everything. I love and respect my parents very much, but they came from a different era, different generation, where you had the breadwinner father. He was distant. He went off and made money, and he supported you, and that was his role. And I had the homemaker mother, and she stayed home, and that was her role. You know, every time I saw her, she always had like laundry, and she was always running around and bustling around the house doing something. She would see me reading a book, she would sigh, oh, I wish I had time to do that. So she was always busy, and I came to think that when I grew up, that's how I had to be. If she never had time to sit and read a book, well then at some point I wouldn't get to either. And that is a huge lesson that I learned in the course of reporting this book, and I think it's an important one for all of us, particularly mothers. Our daughters learn from us. If we don't play, and if we show them that there's no time for that, they won't play. Most girls stop playing at about age 11. And some of the reason why is because we don't play. So recapture that sense of play in your own life. But at this moment, when Tom was walking out the door, I wondered how it was that it had gotten this bad. And I will say that the only saving grace of this story was actually getting to tell this Thanksgiving story on National Public Radio. Because my husband is a reporter for National Public Radio, and he covers the military. And after I was on the radio, he got a call from a Marine colonel that he covers, and she said, you know, Tom, if you were my husband, you wouldn't have made it out the door. But then again, I'm a trained killer. So I'm not a trained killer. What I am is a writer and a journalist. So I did the only thing I know how to do, and that was I took a reporter's notebook, and we went on long walks, and I started interviewing him. Why did you never take parental leave? I have hated you for years. And he didn't take parental leave because even though his company had a policy on the books, he said no man ever took it. You knew it was the kiss of death. He said, and I was too ashamed to tell you that I was too afraid to take it. So what happened? I got the long maternity leave. I got to know the baby and what this cry meant and what that cry meant. And when he would come home and I'd be tired and I'd hand him the baby, it's like, oh, I'm so tired, you take the baby. And he didn't know what to do with the baby, and the baby would start to cry, and then I'd come back and say, give me that baby, you idiot. You don't know anything. And it reinforced this notion that I was the primary parent, that I had the maternal instinct, that I was the default parent. And over time, what started out as just a little bit of a difference with maternity leave, all of a sudden, after 20 years, became me doing everything. Dentist, pediatrician, summer camp planning, babysitting. And we didn't even realize that we had slid into very traditional gender roles. The only difference was I worked full-time too. So we've tried to figure out, well, how can we right this ship? Because the other thing that I will tell you that was really stunning to me, that I didn't know, is that men are just as biologically and physiologically wired for nurture as women are. There really is no maternal instinct. There is a parental or parental instinct that humans are wired to care for infants. We're all wired that way. Even strangers, when they've done brain scan studies and they're looking at pictures of babies, their brains light up in the same way of care, communication, nurturing. Men, their bodies, their testosterone levels drop when they become fathers. They also produce prolactin, the same hormone that produces breast milk, although not in the same quantity, obviously. But one of the things that we started doing is we figured, all right, let's put all of the work on the table that needs to get done, and we'll try to figure out how to fairly divide the labor. And we did it not based on our gender. Girls do inside stuff, boys do outside stuff, but what we liked. I like yard work, so I do the yard work. He likes going on adventures. He does the grocery shopping. He's better at cooking. He cooks. I'm a homebody. I'll do the laundry. And we started small. So we started in the morning trying to make a system so we'd automate it so we wouldn't keep arguing about it and I wouldn't have to nag him all the time. So it started with, all right, I'll empty the dishwasher, you load it. And if he didn't load it, I didn't do it for him. And he'd come home at the end of the day and he'd do it then. Because my time is just as important, I had to realize. And we had to come up with common standards. Because he would always say, well, you're just like Marge Simpson. You know, if the house was burning, you'd come in and do the dishes. And he's probably right. I'm a little crazy about that. So we had to find, well, what's the common standard that we could both agree on? And if he didn't do the dishes, I would pull out my iPhone, I would snap a picture, and I would text it to him. And I would say, really? ? Because there are studies that show that women spend at least 3 to 5 hours a week redoing chores that they don't think their partners have done well. So stop. Think about what you could do. Think of the playing that you could do in that 3 to 5 hours. And so the last thing I'll leave you with, the last part of the book is called Toward Time Serenity, because you're never there. This whole journey about, from time confetti toward time serenity, it's a journey. And we're continuing to learn. I'm up here to tell you I'm very much a work in progress. I'm a whole lot better than I was in chapter 1, but I'm not a guru by any stretch of the imagination. But I'll leave you with this one thought that I absolutely love. The Greeks said that there were 2 kinds of time. Chronos is the time of the clock. It's the time that we rush. It's the time that we lose and we worry about. Will we make it on time? Will we waste our time? But Kairos is the time of the eternal now, the eternal present. And that's always available. Getting out of your head and into the moment. Thank you very much.